We have higher tariffs for clean technologies than for fossil fuels. So we don't have a leverage, a playing field for the new technologies to really thrive. And we need this green transition also to dynamize growth. Because right now, the world is in a new, what we call a new low normal, where growth is below 3%. And that's not enough to fight poverty and inequality in the developing world. So if we want to dynamize growth and have higher and sustainable growth, we need trade and investment, and we need the green transition to really make this happen. So that's why we say trade, investment, and finance has to come together. We have to have a policy coherence framework that will make these three very important elements for the future of the global economy to really look for the synergies and allow the developing countries to thrive and grow appropriately. Now, what are we going to do within the big fit? So in our case, UNCTAD will work with the sustainable investment community, including sovereign wealth and public pension funds, green bond markets, and sustainable stock exchanges to ensure that their many trillions in assets under management can play a role in achieving the SDGs and ensuring sustainable energy for all. And so we will work on the trade side to make trade part of the solution, and we will work on the investment side to really be able to have a sustainable investment, the investment community to come together. But one of the things that we have to fight, and I want to make this my last point, is that we need to bring back trust in the sustainable funds. You know, one of the things that we discovered in the World Investment Report of last year, in 2023, is that the sustainable funds saw a decline of 60% of new funds. 60% decline of new funds coming into the sustainable funds. And why? Because the investors lost trust that the sustainable funds were really sustainable, that their investment was not greenwashing, but was really going to the green, to the right places and the right sectors. So we need to fight greenwashing. We need to bring back trust. We need to bring back the knowledge of what is happening in the investment community, and we need to strengthen the trust of the investors in the sustainable funds so we can work with them and make those funds go to the right places where they are needed most and to the right sectors that really will help to bring the green transition that we are all talking about here in COP29. So again, thank you very much to Azerbaijan for bringing us together for this initiative, and let's work together to have policy coherence and to help those parts of the world that cannot make it happen alone, but need the solidarity and the cooperation with the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. We now open the floor for a few questions. If you could please identify yourself, your media organization, and please wait for the microphone because we have colleagues joining online so that they can understand your question. Let me start, second row, the gentleman in the red pullover.
Thank you. Damien Carrington from The Guardian. Question for Mr. Rafaev. You mentioned in your opening remarks that parties had said that the current text for the NCQG was workable. I mean, we've been told by Annex 1 parties off the record that it's actually unworkable. I mean, can you sort of tell us how big a problem there is to solve there, please? Thanks.
Thank you so much. Yeah, as you know, the text that is currently on the table is a product of 3 years of hard work that the parties have been have been engaging in a inclusive process, and there is no alternative to this text, and everybody understands that there cannot be in the remaining 10 days any alternative text that can be produced which have the same legitimacy as this document. Therefore, of course, there are some diverging views. There are some points that need still to have the convergence on, and this is exactly why the multilateral negotiation process exists, that to bridge the gaps and find the solutions. So therefore, we are expressing the prevailing idea and the prevailing atmosphere, the spirit within the room, which is everybody understand that this is a text that is a product of the ad hoc work program, and but with some iterations, with some, of course, streamlining, narrowing down options, this text could be a good starting point for continued negotiation process. Thank you.
Thank you. The lady in the second row on the other block.
Hi, thanks. Victoria from Sky News, the UK. I've got a question for Mr. Rafaev as well. Argentina walked away from COP29 yesterday. Are you worried about any other countries following suit, especially in the context of the US election? And are you worried about the COP29 process in general because of that?
Thank you for the question. This matter is actually a bilateral matter between Argentina and the UN, and I cannot further comment on this matter, and I would like to propose that we stick to today's thematic theme, which is finance. Thank you.
But it does affect the process if there's a country missing. So what does the presidency make of that? Are you concerned or not?
I think I've been clear in my answer that we would rather focus on the topic of today.
The gentleman in the same block, fifth row, approximately, just behind you. Yeah.
The question is for Mr. Rafaev too.
Could you please identify yourself first?
Laurent Thomé with Agence France Presse. President Aliyev yesterday, his criticism of France caused the French environment minister to cancel her trip here. His words about oil being a gift from God also raised a lot of eyebrows here. You think the president's words this week are having a negative effect on the climate finance negotiations? And what can you say about the French minister's decision to cancel her trip and how that also affects the negotiations? Thank you.
Thank you. I think Mr. President has been quite clear on his message, and I don't want to comment on or interpret on this statement. But in terms of French ministers' intention not to come, the host country, Azerbaijan, has made sure that we have the inclusive process here. We have hosted more than 80 leaders, world leaders. Here we have hundreds of ministers attending, and we have ensured that all the negotiation process is inclusive. We have opened our doors to everybody to come to engage in very constructive, fruitful discussions. Our doors are still open, and we hope that all who are attending here have only one intention: to come to join us in this collective effort to get an outcome that is a positive and that will be helping mainly the developing countries to be meeting their needs and priorities. Thank you so much.
Let's go on the other side, the gentleman in the middle.
Thank you. Sebastian Rodriguez from Climate Home News. I wanted to ask for Mr. Rafiev on the Climate Finance Action Fund, which was proposed a few months ago as an option to mobilize private finance from oil producers. I was wondering if the fund would be launched during COP29, and if the presidency has faced any hurdles in sort of getting that running. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, Climate Finance Action Fund is one of our 14 presidency initiatives. When we announced it, we have been clear about the process that we want to proceed with. We have established it with a participation, with an intention to create an innovative source of funding for developing countries with an innovative concept. But at the same time, in order to ensure the inclusive process of concept development, we have decided to include also potential donor countries into the working group that we have established to work out a concept that would be workable, that would be acceptable for them to join. So therefore, at this COP, we have announced that the working group that we have established is working on the concept paper, to have a detailed concept paper, because this is a very complex process to establish a new fund that will need some time, but we are on it and we are working closely with all potential donor countries. We have seen a great interest by the potential donors from both developing countries, from the developed countries, from the public sector and the private sector, that encourage us to continue this work in a way that we can establish and operationalize the fund as soon as possible. Thank you.
Mr. Aik Holim, would you like to add anything from the WTO?
Well, maybe I'd just say that, you know, the comments by Secretary General UNCTAD and the administrator from UNDP were really very clear on the role that trade can play as a solution to the climate challenge that we face. My only comment is just to emphasize that, you know, as we know, trade is driven by comparative advantage, and that comparative advantage, in our view, and also based on our research, is changing. And it's changing because we are seeing more in terms of a green comparative advantage. And we think that creates new opportunities, again, to drive the transition towards clean technologies, towards clean emissions, and so forth. So that's our main message today, and also throughout the COP, is that as we look towards the transition, new opportunities have been created, and the new opportunities allow us to think a lot more about green comparative advantage, which is about countries doing what they are green at, and relatively green at, I should say, and being relatively green at that will again drive new economic opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. The lady here in the first row.
Can you stand up, please? Thank you very much. Shauna Core, the Daily Mirror in Ireland. I think this is a question that really hasn't been addressed so far, so really I want to put it to the three speakers on the panel. So for the second year running, it appears that the host country of COP has used that position to boost oil and gas deals. So I'd like to know from all three panel members, do you think that's acceptable? And do you think this in some way is fostering a bit of negativity around these talks and faith in the outcome? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I think the messages that has been shared by the host country at different levels on that matter was exactly looking at the future. We are not denying our past, but we are looking at the future. All the messages that have been shared so far is exactly saying that Azerbaijan is transitioning its energy sector. Azerbaijan is putting a lot of effort, a lot of investment for that, and that is we should look to the future, not to the past. So therefore, whatever happened in the past, we are not denying this, but we should look further into the future. Thank you.
So no further Mr. Steiner?
Let me just add one word, and I won't comment on a particular instance that I have read about, but I have no ability to judge. I think from a basic principle, clearly, COP presidencies, host countries, are in good faith hosting the world at a particular moment with the United Nations to negotiate. But let me say one word which I find sometimes a little troubling. This question of, where would you host a COP? Are there countries that, are by definition good hosts and others are bad hosts? I think in the United Nations, we maintain the principle that every nation, first of all, should have a right to be heard. Secondly, every nation should also be able to be listened to. When we convene meetings like this, let us also be a little bit more conscious of the fact that labels are not always the fairest way of describing a nation. Some of the largest oil producers have hosted COP in the past, and seemingly this seemed to be a perfectly acceptable phenomenon. So I would rather focus on the fact that we have countries that step forward, and this is a major effort that countries undertake in hosting a conference of the parties. And I think what we should judge a host by is, first of all, the integrity, to your point. Secondly, the ability of facilitating and convening the world around a topic that every 12 months the United Nations actually brings the world together around the table. If we did not have host countries, we would not be able to do so. And I think the world ultimately benefits from the fact that every country in a COP is put on the spotlight and under the spotlight here. Because we can allow citizens to actually judge whether their countries are contributing to solutions or whether they are walking away from being part of the solution. And I think these are some of the, let's say, criteria by which we need to judge ultimately whether COPs can contribute. And I only say this because in the run-up to every COP, we obviously focus on what we have not been able to accomplish, and we are far behind where the science has told us we need to be. What I sometimes regret is that a great deal of what is now happening, and I spoke to some of the numbers before, are forgotten. These painful negotiations over the years, the agreement to have NDCs for countries to have a first and now a second generation of NDCs, these are actually the foundations on which we now see a clean energy revolution happening in the world. It would be good sometimes to report on that because these are not instant coffee machines. The fact that it takes countries a number of years to turn NDCs into actually a significant change in the trajectory of their energy matrix and investments matters. This is why Europe last year could reduce its emission footprint by 8%, and many other statistics that we could cite here now. So I think every COP will have its controversies. Every country has its own past, and you just spoke to it, Mr. Rafiev. To me, the more important question is, this COP is not about Azerbaijan. This COP is about the world being able to take the Paris Agreement and move forward together. Maybe a country will leave that negotiation. I think we have seen over the last 28 COPs that this process is robust, resilient, it can stand turbulence, and the world has actually used it, even if it was slow. It could have done it faster. And as I think we all realize, the cost of now having to act ever faster has gone up. But we still have not only a UN Framework Convention, we have a Paris Agreement, and we have remarkable numbers beginning to show the transitions that are happening. I thought I would just offer that as context because it is part of the story of the COP process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steiner. Let me underline with a few numbers that the world has come to Baku. So we have around 70,000 registered participants, 34,368 parties, 13,275 observers, 3,618 media representatives, and a category technical staff, workforces, volunteers is 13,977. So this adds up to 67,839. Thank you very much for today. Looking very much forward seeing all of you tomorrow, same time, same place. Thank you.
That's Hungary currently holds the presidency of the Council of the European Union, and Jacob Worksman, who is the head of the EU delegation, our chief negotiator. Our speakers will make some brief introductory remarks, and then we'd be very happy to take some questions from the floor. So, Veronica, if you'd like to go first.
Thank you, and thank you for all for being here to listen to us. I think first and foremost, the most important is to reaffirm the EU's commitment to achieving climate neutrality by 2050, with continuing to demonstrate our leadership in climate action. At COP29, we are aiming to achieve a balanced outcome, with focusing on increasing the global efforts on implementation and ambition, with a view of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. I think that's the most important from our side. Last year at COP28, the agreement on the global stocktake and overall the UAE consensus signaled the end of the fossil fuel era. We have to also reaffirm our commitment to transitioning away from fossil fuels and towards the full implementation of the UAE consensus, with aiming for an ambitious, credible and 1.5 aligned pathway, which is setting the ground for the next round of NDCs. This year is particularly important on finance, and in terms of the new collective quantified goal, we are aiming for an ambitious and realistic goal, with agreeing on all elements of the NCQG and not leaving anything for COP30 the next year. We have to agree on a quantum with an extended group of contributors, with parties that are capable to do so with a collective responsibility towards global solidarity. And we need to ensure that finance flows to those that are most vulnerable. And we have to send a strong signal on the major shift in the global economy. And we also have to send a strong signal to the private sector, because without the private sector, we will not be able to achieve the full green transition. We have to conclude on Article 6. Article 6 could support and bring in funding for mitigation and adaptation projects. It's very important to set common standards based on high environmental integrity, additionality, accountability, and durability. In terms of adaptation, we are halfway through of the UAE BELIM work program. Which we can achieve here is to set further work for the adaptation indicators to be concluded by next year. The EU is strongly committed to promote human rights and gender equality. Therefore, having a new gender work program and the gender work plan is an utmost priority for the European Union, and also that all of our actions and decisions are based on the best available science and on the IPCC reports. And we also have to highlight that by preserving economic competitiveness and promoting social inclusiveness, all societies can benefit from a just and equitable green transition, with highlighting that climate action should not be seen as a burden, but as an opportunity for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. Maybe Jake, you'd like to add some words?
Thanks a lot, Alistair, and thanks, Veronica. So just a few perspectives from the negotiating rooms, which, as you know, have been running for almost a week now in trying to deliver that very vitally important outcome for this COP. Vitally important in terms of delivering on the goals of the Paris Agreement, but also for the EU in particular, vitally important for providing the context in which we will make our own pathway to net zero by the middle of the century. So the EU is here in full force. We had 13 EU heads of state and government appearing in the leadership segment that opened the COP, plus the President of the European Council. And now we are getting down into the trenches to complete the technical level negotiations to ensure that when ministers arrive next week, there will be as little as possible for them to do in bringing us to a final conclusion of the outcomes for this COP. Veronica ran through those outcomes, put them in a little bit more context. As many of you know, this COP is halfway through what we call the Paris Agreement ambition cycle. So we had the global stocktake last year, which, based on the science that was delivered by the IPCC, pointed the direction that we will need to travel in order to reach net zero and to avoid dangerous climate change, with those classic statements with regard to needing to undertake the energy transition seriously by transitioning away from fossil fuels, and sent the signals of expectations with regard to the nationally determined contributions that each party will have to deliver by the end of next year. This COP is labeled appropriately an enabling COP. It's intended to send the signals that parties are taking what they agreed seriously at the GST last year, and that the resources will be available to assist those that need them in completing their NDCs, but also implementing the commitments that they've already taken under the Paris Agreement. So where we are now on Thursday of the first week of negotiations, the EU remains hopeful that we'll be able to complete this task in time. Why? Well, on some of the key issues that we've faced already, we managed to resolve the agenda, which for those of you who are loyal COP watchers know is always a challenge, because in this process we have to agree the agenda by consensus. And we often arrive at the beginning of the COP in a situation that we found ourselves at the beginning of this COP, where a number of parties exercise the right to add agenda items to the provisional agenda. And we have to reach consensus on that agenda before it can be adopted and the work can be launched. The Azerbaijani presidency managed to negotiate away most of the agenda item proposals that clearly would not achieve consensus, but it left open this remaining issue of whether we could agree on the scope of a very important agenda item for this meeting, which is what we call the UAE dialogue, the one process that we agreed at the GST that is focusing on follow-up to that GST. That was now agreed, both through launching that agenda item, but also through additional presidential consultations that will start today to make sure that we have that full universe of GST outcomes in front of negotiators and in front of ministers next week when we wrap up this COP. So that was good. That was some momentum agreeing that agenda. It wasn't easy, but we got through it. You'll also have heard that on that second critical negotiating outcome that we need for this COP, the completion of the Paris Agreement rules governing international carbon markets, that we made some early progress as well, with the adoption of the essential methodologies and standards necessary to run the 6.4 mechanism for issuing credits under the UN's authority under Article 6. The SBM, the supervisory body on that mechanism, had agreed a set of methodologies. Those were essentially noted by the CMA. And now we can move ahead to solve the balance of the issues under Article 6, which are the Article 6.2 rules on transparency and accountability. Here we also see progress, mostly because parties are now agreeing with the EU and others that were concerned about the transparency and accountability of the bilateral markets that will operate under Article 6.2. And as a result of that, we're making progress on rules that will increase the level of upfront information required of those parties that intend to participate in these bilateral cooperative approaches, and also connect that upfront information with a transparency and an accountability regime that will allow the UN system to review that data and see whether or not it is sufficiently complete to give those that want to participate in those bilateral markets the confidence that those units that are being traded are indeed credible and reliable and demonstrate environmental integrity. So we're seeing progress there this week as well. Not yet completed, but we hope to have as few issues left to ministers on the Article 6 negotiations as possible. The big outcome, which I know that you're all following closely, is, of course, the delivery of that goal that Veronica referred to, the new collective quantified goal that will indicate in quantitative terms what it is that developed countries and other parties are prepared to contribute in the form of climate finance, both from public sources, but also by mobilizing and catalyzing those essential private sector forces that are necessary to deliver the amount of resources that parties will need in order to implement their NDCs. Here, if you hear the sounds and you've been following the voices in the negotiating rooms, you can tell that parties are still very significantly far apart on the key elements of the design of the NCQG that Veronica laid out. On its structure, how much will it focus exclusively on public finance? How much can we add to our conversation, the very important conversation as to how we can help mobilize and catalyze private sector finance as well? That's the issue of structure. Who will be joining the current developed country donor base as contributors to the public sector element of that goal? Another issue that's still open for negotiations. And then, of course, the crucial number that I'm sure will appear in the headlines as you write your final reports of this COP, what is the quantum? How much beyond 100 billion for the private sector goal and the private sector money that immediately mobilizes? And how do we capture that broader goal of mobilizing private finance that will be essential to meet the trillion-dollar needs of developing countries in particular, but the world at large, in terms of implementing everyone's obligations under the Paris Agreement. Here, as I say, I would say at the negotiator level and even at the HODS level, it's hard to see exactly where the landing grounds lie at the moment. What we are hoping for is the kind of spirit of compromise that emerged in the pre-COP held in Bakú several weeks ago, where we had ministers present, where we think that there was a firmer grasp of what it is that developed countries as contributors and other contributors can provide in terms of their capabilities of mobilizing public sector finance, and the inevitable need to turn to the private sector to mobilize much larger amounts of money through the real economy, that those realities were much more present in the minds of ministers than they seem to be in the minds of negotiators. So we are hoping that that spirit of the pre-COP from Baku will return when ministers themselves return next week to help us to find the way forward in closing this very significant gap that we still have at the technical level in negotiations. In the corridors, I think that you can hear messages that will help us moving in that direction. So you will have heard announcements, for example, from China about the scale that they have calculated in terms of the South-South bilateral cooperation that they've been providing over recent years. A similar announcement was provided by the UAE. And in the corridors, other countries that have developed the capacities over the years, the capabilities over the years to provide South-South cooperation, are talking about those numbers more freely. There was also a report, I think it was yesterday or the day before, from the multilateral development banks, the entire community of multilateral development banks, so this isn't just the World Bank, but it's also the regional development banks and the newer development banks, those that were essentially designed and put in place by the emerging economies like China, Brazil, South Africa, India, and others, the Asian International Investment Bank, and the New Development Bank. They also contributed to this report of the multilateral development banks. And what that showed is that trends are towards the work of those banks providing more of their resources towards climate finance and increasing their capacities and their abilities to leverage more private sector finance as well. So that's another message in the corridors that I think will help create more of a boundary based on real-world experience about what a reasonable landing ground in terms of the quantum and the sources of climate finance over the coming decades will come from. There was also a report that was published, I believe it was early today, which is the third report of the International High-Level Expert Group on Climate Finance, which has also been generating numbers to help guide policymakers towards what is both ambitious but also achievable in terms of the levers that we can pull at the national level and international level to move public and private finance in the right direction. And again, we think that this will help to provide a little bit more of a framework in which the negotiators and critically the ministers that will be arriving next week can use to close the gap that currently exists between the negotiator level. So that's a quick, hopeful update from the negotiating rooms. If you have more specific questions about different elements of the negotiations, I'm happy to try to provide those perspectives as well. And I see hands going up already. But we remain hopeful, hopeful not only because these issues have been with us for a long time, and I think each time we engage on it, our understanding of where the landing grounds deepens, but also because we believe the political guidance will be coming soon from the ministers as they arrive. Over to Alistair to help manage the high level of interest in more detail. Thanks.
Thank you, Jake. Okay, so we can open the floor up for some questions. Can I just remind you to say your name and the outlet that you work for, and please speak into the microphone that will be provided. Maybe let's start here at the front, the lady in blue, and the man just behind her. That would be great. And then we'll see how we get on.
My question, Azerbaijan television. My question to the Mr. Jacob Waxman. We know that climate change is the global problem for whole world. But some European leaders don't participate in the COP29. So what's the reason, and why do European countries not show unity against climate change? Thank you very much.
Thanks. We'll take the next question and then do a round. The gentleman just behind in the scarf.
Thank you. This is Antonio Piemontese, Wired Italia. So how much do you rely on the private sector, and are you supporting as the European Union a position to tax like the wealth ones or fossil fuel companies to get climate finance? And second question, what do you think about the Azerbaijan presidency in its role? I think it's getting smarter than expected. What do you think?
Thank you. Maybe we can take one more question and then Jake and Veronica can give their responses. Maybe Lucas there, just behind you.
Lucas Knigge for Table Media. So on NCQG, we've seen two versions of the text, one yesterday, one today. Both of them really expanded quite a lot. Do you think the COP presidency is doing enough on the climate finance goal regarding the text that is coming out and how it's dealing with the parties now, especially after the comments of Aliyev also yesterday? How did that affect the negotiations towards France and the Netherlands? Thank you.
Thanks. Maybe I'll start out with the question about EU leadership from the Commission perspective, and I'll turn to Veronica to talk about what I already mentioned of the high participation of member states at head of state and government level. I know that the President of the Commission definitely wanted to come to this COP. She's come to many COPs in the past. She's played her leadership role there. She wanted to be here very much. But she also needed to fulfill responsibilities back at home in Brussels at a point in which she's just pulling together the College of Commissioners that will serve in delivering a mandate that is all about ensuring that the EU is on a pathway to net zero by 2050 and comes forward with all the targets and possible and policies necessary to achieve that. In the meantime, of course, as I mentioned before, there was a high degree of member state presence at head of state and government level, as well as the President of the European Council. And my boss, the outgoing and incoming Commissioner for Climate Change, was here representing the EU on behalf of the President as well. I'll turn to Veronica in a moment to say a few words about member state leadership. Staying on the geopolitics and what we heard from the Azerbaijani president yesterday with regard to France and the Netherlands, both France and the Netherlands are absolute leaders in the area of climate policy and climate finance. They are very strong voices on climate action and have played pivotal roles at previous COPs, and their delegations will play pivotal roles at this COP as well. Regardless of any bilateral disagreements, the COP should be a place where all parties feel at liberty to come and to negotiate on climate action. That's what the EU is doing now, and that's what we will continue to do to reach a successful conclusion at this week. The COP presidency has, of course, a particularly important role and responsibility to enable and enhance that full and inclusive participation. They've been playing that role this week, and we expect them to play that role next week as well. On the question on taxing fossil fuel companies and whether the EU is supportive of using carbon pricing as a way of not just incentivizing reduced emissions, but also generating financial resources to reinvest in climate policy, absolutely. We display that through our domestic policies, through the ETS, the emissions trading system, at the regional level, but many member states top that up with their own pricing on fossil fuels, et cetera. And we are active promoters of putting in place similar kinds of pricing around the world. In addition to that, we are very interested in exploring innovative systems for adding additional opportunities to ensure polluters pay and to ensure what they pay is reinvested in climate action. Examples of this would be our work through the ICAO, through the International Civil Aviation Organization, to implement fully and we hopefully effectively the CORSIA system, but also we're working through the International Maritime Organization to ensure that sector, which has been unregulated for quite some time, when it's operating internationally, also pays a fee. We're participants in this global solidarity levy process that you may have heard about, which is looking at ways in which we can enhance this in other sectors and with regard to other polluters as well. The question on the NCQG and the texts and what they say about the state of play of the negotiations, we are very worried because there were literally more than a year of preparation in producing the text that was quite long, that came into the negotiations through the work of the co-facilitators at the outset of last week. And that work was rejected as a basis of negotiations, unfortunately, when the work actually started under the NCQG contact groups. We know that the co-facilitators have now been given a mandate to produce a new text. That was tabled today. and we understand that that has been accepted as a basis of negotiation, so there's a potential now to work forward, but it's still over 30 pages long. I've seen some versions of the outcome on the NCQG that have been no more than 1.5 or 2 pages in order to capture everything that we need to send the signals that are necessary under the new collective quantified goal. So clearly we are way off a landing ground if you look at the texts on their own. Does the presidency have a role in shaping this text? Absolutely. COP presidencies have had a critical role in generating texts for crucial outcomes of past COPs, and we would expect them to have to step in into this as well. But usually, appropriately, and at this COP too, they need to let the negotiations take their course, to allow the technical level to exhaust all possibilities, and in doing so, signaling where the landing grounds might lie. Not through the text they're working on, but certainly through the interventions that they're making, the way in which they're expressing their red lines, the way in which they're signaling flexibilities. And so I assume, and I have every confidence, that the Azerbaijani presidency is listening carefully in the room. And when the time comes where the pen will be handed over them to help them to produce a landing ground, I'm sure they'll be there for us, but it won't be until next week, I would expect. So with that, I'll turn back to Veronica.
Thank you, Jake. And to just add briefly on the NCQG and the presidency's role in that. So throughout this year, the COP29 presidency actually organized a number of events to bring us heads of delegations together, also ministers together, to facilitate the discussions, to bring us closer to each other. And that the last event as such was the pre-COP a month ago, where we could see progress. As Jake mentioned, what we see now is a step back with a new text, because the text was managed to get down to a couple of pages. Now again, it's rather 30 pages, and experts are working on that until very late at night, also to support the process to arrive at the end of this week to a text that can be presented to ministers. Because, of course, ministers have to focus on those elements and on those decisions that are requiring that level in the hierarchy and that level of authority in that sense. So at the technical level, experts are doing everything to bring closer the positions, and also the COP29 presidency is aware, and they are also aware of their role when they have to step in. And as Jake said, we hope and we expect also that they will step in when that's needed, but also that it's a party-driven process, so they have to take it also into consideration. And in sense of ministers and leaders from European countries, first time the Hungarian Prime Minister attended this COP. So he was also here on behalf of Hungary, and many other European leaders were present. And also for the next week, we will have a number of ministers here who will coordinate throughout the next week until the very end, when we will need to make the decision. So we know that ministers are going to come, and they are going to be here and be in this process.
Okay, we only have 3 minutes, so I'll take a couple more questions, maybe from the other side of the room. The lady on the front row in purple, and maybe just behind in the white blouse, please. Thank you.
Hi, this is Rebecca from Carbon Pulse. Sorry. I'm just wondering if there's been a shift from China on becoming a donor country as well. I heard something about that. And then also, what is the atmosphere in Article 6 rooms now that the U.S. is maybe not as involved in the talks? Thank you.
And the second question just behind. Thanks.
Thank you. Kate Abnett from Reuters. Are there any issues that could get wrapped up this week? In particular, is there any hope that Article 6 could get finished before the SBs close? Thanks.
Okay, do you want to tackle this? Maybe one more. Okay, you were first, the gentleman on the left-hand side here.
Thank you. Yeah, one issue on the NCQG that I don't think I heard you mention was, Jake Fiddle with Christ. One issue on the NCQG is the idea of numerical set-asides for adaptation and loss and damage. I'm wondering if you can characterize the European position on that and your level of openness to quantitative thresholds on those thematic areas.
Okay, thanks a lot. China as a donor country, best to ask China. I mean, I think they, as I said before, they had made this announcement that described what they think that their South-South flows amount to in climate finance over the past 5 or 6 years or so. An impressive number, not one that is subject to the kind of transparency and accounting methodologies that the current donor base goes through the OECD and otherwise, so it's kind of difficult for us to assess those numbers, but we're very pleased that China is putting itself into that space once again and saying that they're willing to undertake South-South cooperation. Whether that then leads them to signal that they're willing to participate in the NCQG, we'll have to wait and see. The atmosphere in the Article 6 room is definitely improved, and I would say it's improved in large part through the U.S. Recognizing, along with other parties, that we're keen to settle all the rules last year in Dubai on the basis that we had agreed everything we needed to agree, to acknowledge that additional rules would actually help in improving the transparency and accountability of carbon markets. My perception is that they continue to play that role in the room now in helping to broker compromises and providing their expertise on both carbon markets but also on legal drafting, and the mood remains very, very constructive. Will that mean that we wrap it up this week? It's been my experience that as long as there is a little bit more time to negotiate on something that's that complicated, we'll take it. So I don't think that we will completely close every issue this week, but I think that we will have developed a momentum that will ensure that we wrap it up certainly in the early part of next week. On adaptation sub-goals, the EU does not support including adaptation sub-goals within the NCQG for a number of reasons, but I think the most important one is that it's important to take into account that what we're not creating, regardless of the quantum, is a single fund. Right? This is an aggregation of flows that are coming from multiple different sources, some of which are completely dedicated to adaptation, like the Adaptation Fund, some of which are a mix, like the GCF, some of which are entirely focused by their mandate on mitigation. So you can't kind of create out of this aggregation a single goal that can be enforced or disciplined through all these different actions. So what instead we have agreed in the past, and I'm sure we would be willing to agree again, is the encouragement that this money increasingly is spent on adaptation, particularly if it's public finance resources, and that it addresses the needs as a priority of the poor and the most vulnerable communities. In that context, in the past, you know that we've agreed to double the level of adaptation finance. That kind of goal, I think, could also work as an incentive to keep the pressure on donors and others to continue to take into account that public finance is scarce, and when it's available, it should be used as a priority to invest in an adaptation and resilience. Thanks.
Looking at the time, I think we've run out. So thank you all very much. Sorry? Sorry, Veronica would like to make some further remarks.
Yes, not on substance, but I just wanted to thank you for your work. Because I know that this process is very hard to follow from the outside. It's a very complex process with many things going on at the same time. Therefore, you being here, I think it's very important to inform your communities, your readers, about what's happening here in the biggest UN event, basically. So it's a very hard work, and thanks for your efforts in that from our side.
Thanks, Veronica. So we'll wrap up there. Thank you very much for coming, and keep an eye on the agenda. We'll be holding more press conferences next week.